Her heart stopped right as she whispered my name. That's how I remember the moment everything changed. Not the beeping machines, not the smell of antiseptic, not the pale hospital lights buzzing above. Just her voice soft, trembling. Calling me baby like she always did when she wanted to say goodbye without really saying it. And then, silence. Deafening, soul-crushing silence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, her hand still in mine, slowly losing its warmth. The nurse walked in seconds later, her face already braced for what she had to say. But she didn't need to say it. I knew. I'd known before the machines flatlined. I'd known. The second my wife, my best friend, my reason for breathing let go of me, and I just sat there, for what felt like hours. When I finally stood up, my knees buckled. The hallway outside her room was cold, endless. I walked like I was underwater slow. Disoriented, trying to hold myself together while the rest of the world kept moving. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. There were two people I needed to call. My parents. My mom picked up on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, cheerful as always. "How's she doing today? Any better?" And just like that, my throat closed. My voice cracked. "She's gone." There was a pause, a long one. Then gently, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That's just terrible." I waited for her to say they'd come right away, that they were getting in the car, that they'd be by my side before sunset. But instead, I heard her whisper something to my dad in the background, muffled words. A sigh. Then she returned to the line and said, "But the funeral, it's not this Sunday, right?" I blinked. "What?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully, too carefully. "It's just, Sunday is your brother's birthday. We already planned everything. You know how much he's been looking forward to this. Could you, maybe push it to next week?" I thought I'd misheard her. "You're asking me to reschedule my wife's funeral so you can throw a party?" "It's not a party," she said quickly. "It's just a small get-together, family, cake. You know how Tyler gets if things change last minute. He's sensitive." I laughed. Or maybe I cried. I honestly don't know. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the doctor told me her cancer was back. "She just died, today, and you're talking about balloons and candles." "She was lovely," my mom said. "But you know we were never that close to her. And you know how things have been lately between us." Yeah, I knew. My wife had always felt like she didn't quite belong at family gatherings. My mother was polite, distant. My father barely spoke to her unless it was about sports or the weather. And Tyler, well, Tyler had always acted like he was allergic to grief or empathy or anything that didn't revolve around him. Still, I thought they'd show up. I thought they'd be there, for me, for my daughter, for their own son. "I'll let you know the details," I said, voice numb. "You can come or not. Do whatever makes you feel good. Sweetheart," she tried again, "don't be like that. It's just bad timing." I ended the call. I stood there in the hallway, my hands still shaking, staring at the phone screen as if it might blink back to life and give me a different version of reality. One where my mom broke down crying and told me she'd be on the next flight. One where my dad said, "Son, we'll be right there." One where family meant something. But no, they'd chosen a birthday over a burial. And in that moment, something inside me broke for good. Later that night, I sat alone in our apartment. Our daughter was at her grandmother's on her mom's side. I didn't want her to see me like this. I stared at our wedding photo on the shelf, the way her eyes sparkled, the slight dimple in her cheek. The way she leaned into me like the world could fall apart and we'd still have each other. Except now she was gone, and I was alone. The apartment was too quiet, too still. Every corner of the room whispered her name, the tea mug she always used. Her book with a bookmark still halfway through, the scent of her lavender lotion still lingering in the air. I sat down on the couch and buried my face in my hands. I had planned to mourn with family, to hold my parents close, to let them share in the weight of this grief so it wouldn't crush me. But now the grief was mine alone, because they had other plans, plans with streamers and cake and laughter that now felt grotesque. The next morning I called the funeral home and confirmed everything for Sunday, and I made a decision. I wouldn't beg anyone to show up for the woman I loved if they couldn't stand with me in my pain. They didn't deserve a seat in my healing, but I would remember, not just her, but this moment, this choice they made. And one day I promised myself they'd remember it too. Not with cake, not with candles, but with regret, with silence, with tears, and with the kind of lesson no birthday could ever erase. The morning of the funeral, the sky looked like it hadn't slept either. Heavy gray clouds hung low, threatening to weep with me. I stood outside the chapel, arms folded across my chest, dressed in the same black suit I'd worn for our wedding. Rehearsal dinner. Back then, it symbolized celebration. Now it felt like armor, thin, fragile, useless against the cold crawling through my bones. People began arriving early, her coworkers from the hospice wing, her high school friends who Hadn't seen her in years but still carried memories etched deep in their hearts. Her aunt flew in from Florida. Even her old piano teacher, who must have been nearly 90, made it. But not my parents, not my brother. Every time the chapel door creaked open, my heart jerked like a puppet on a string, hoping, just hoping they'd show up last minute like a miracle crashing through grief. But they never did. The front row stayed half empty. 3 chairs on the right side reserved for my parents and Tyler, untouched, unclaimed, like they were placeholders for dignity that never came. I held my daughter's hand tightly as we walked in. She was wearing a little black dress her mother had picked out months ago for a school recital that never happened. Her eyes were wide, confused, a little scared. I had explained death to her as gently as I could, but there was no way to prepare a 7-year-old for this. "Where's Nana? And Grandpa?" she whispered as I sat beside her. I swallowed hard. "They couldn't make it," I said, voice dry, brittle. She frowned. "But they said they'd come. Mommy would have wanted them here." I didn't respond, because anything I said would only unravel me in front of her. The service began with a quiet hymn that made my throat ache. Then came the eulogy. I stood before everyone, my knees trembling, palms sweating, vision blurred. I looked over the faces. Her friends were crying. Even people I barely knew had their heads bowed in reverence. I scanned the crowd one more time. No mom, no dad, no Tyler. Just 3 empty chairs that screamed louder than the organ. I spoke anyway. I told them about the woman I fell in love with on a rainy day in college when she handed me an umbrella and said, "You look like someone who doesn't ask for help even when he needs it." I told them how she danced in the kitchen barefoot, how she hummed when nervous, how she believed in leaving love notes in my lunchbox long after we got married. I told them how she fought like hell when the diagnosis came back, and how, even when her hair fell out and her voice got weak, she never once stopped smiling for our daughter. I didn't cry when I said it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My tears had dried up the moment I realized my family had chosen balloons over her goodbye. After the service, I stood alone by her casket as people trickled out. Some hugged me, some said things like, "She's in a better place," or "Time heals everything." I nodded at all of them, but inside, I felt nothing but silence and a low, growing anger. We buried her just before sunset. The casket was lowered. I looked at my daughter beside me. She had placed a pink rose on top, her tiny hand shaking. "She liked pink the most," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. As the final prayers ended, I looked up one last time, one desperate glance toward the cemetery road. But no car arrived. No last-minute redemption, just absence, the kind that takes root deep inside you. That night, after I tucked my daughter into bed, I sat in the living room alone. The silence was unbearable. I poured myself a drink, not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed something to blunt the edges of what I was about to do. I opened Facebook. I wish I hadn't. There they were, my parents, smiling beside Tyler, surrounded by streamers and balloons. A cake with "Happy 30th, Tyler" written in blue frosting. My mom was clapping. My dad had a party horn in his mouth. Tyler looked a little uncomfortable, probably because he knew I was burying my wife that very hour. But he didn't leave. He didn't say, "This feels wrong." He just smiled through it. The caption under the photo read, "So proud of our amazing son. Here's to 30 and thriving." 30 and thriving. While I was learning how to raise a grieving child alone. While my daughter cried herself to sleep asking why her grandparents never came. I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. And in that moment, something in me hardened. I thought grief would be the most painful part of losing her. But it was St.it was the betrayal. The realization that the people who raised me, who once held my hand when I scraped my knee, who promised to always be there, that they had turned their backs when I needed them most. Not out of malice, but out of inconvenience. That's what hurt the most. They didn't hate her. They just didn't care enough. And now, they'd carved a wound I wouldn't let time erase. I shut the laptop and sat in the dark. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the night the idea was born. A quiet idea, a patient one, not for revenge but for remembrance. Because if they thought that day would remain just another birthday, they were wrong. Soon, that date would mean something else, something they'd never forget. And every year, when they tried to celebrate, they'd be reminded of the woman they didn't show up for, and the son they abandoned in the middle of his greatest heartbreak. A year passed, 12 months of silence, bitterness, and forced smiles. My parents hadn't apologized, not really. After the funeral, I received a text from my mom that read, "Hope it went okay. We were thinking of you, thinking of me," like. That was supposed to cover the crater they left in my chest when they chose cake over closure. My brother. Radio silence. I think he felt guilty, but not enough to pick up the phone. Guilt without action is just cowardice wrapped in politeness. And I was done being polite. The first few months were the hardest. My daughter would ask questions I couldn't answer. Why don't Nana and Grandpa come see us anymore? Or did they not love Mommy? I tried to protect her from the truth, but kids have a way of sensing things. She knew something was broken. She just didn't know how deep the fracture ran. I didn't reply to my parents' holiday greetings. I didn't show up for Thanksgiving. And when Christmas came, we stayed home, just the two of us. We baked cookies and watched the same movies my wife used to love. But even laughter felt different, muted, like joy was something I had to rehearse. Still, I waited for July 23rd to come back around. That date now lived into timelines. For them, it was Tyler's birthday. For me and for my daughter, it was the day we lost the heart of our home, and they were never going to forget that again. Not if I could help it. I spent weeks planning the box, not because I wanted revenge. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about truth, about memory. About making sure they couldn't keep pretending they hadn't made the most callous decision of their lives. I found an old wooden jewelry box from a local antique store. It was delicate, hand-carved, the kind of thing my wife would have loved. I lined it with soft velvet. Then I placed her wedding ring inside the same ring I had slipped onto her finger on the day we promised each other forever. The ring she still wore when they rolled her into the morgue. Next came the obituary. A clipping from the local paper, yellowing slightly at the edges. I'd cut it out myself the week she died, not really knowing why. Maybe I'd known even then that one day it would serve a different purpose. Last, I printed a photo. It was taken just 2 days before she passed. She was in the hospital bed, pale but smiling, holding our daughter close. My little girl had drawn a picture for her a stick figure family under a rainbow, and my wife had taped it to the side of the bed. Her hand rested on our daughter's head in the photo, her eyes filled with a kind of quiet bravery I've never seen in anyone else. I tucked it all into the box gently, like it was sacred, and then I wrote the letter. No threats, no swearing. Just one quiet truth. Since you couldn't be there to say goodbye, let me help you remember her. Every single year. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. On the morning of July 23rd, I mailed the package. No return address, just their names and their house number. I didn't go to the post office near my home. I drove 2 towns over to ensure they wouldn't suspect anything in advance. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about impact. I wanted the silence of the package to scream louder than any phone call or argument ever could. That day, I took my daughter to the lake, her mother's favorite place. We threw flower petals into the water and talked about the things we missed most. Her laugh, her pancakes, her bedtime songs. We didn't mention Nana or Grandpa, but I knew even as we sat there that the package had arrived. I pictured my mom bringing it inside, examining the handwriting. I imagined my dad opening it at the kitchen table while Tyler was there, ready to cut his birthday cake. I could almost hear the shift in the air the moment celebration turned into confusion, then discomfort, then silence. My cousin called me that night. "Did you send them something?" he asked. His voice was tight, cautious. "Why?" "They opened a box during the party, right in front of everyone. I wasn't there, but my sister was. Said it got weird. I didn't say a word. Your mom started crying. Your dad left the room. Tyler just stood there like a ghost. Still, I said nothing. I let the silence do what the words never could. That night, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my mother. Her voice cracked from the first second. "I don't know if you'll ever speak to us again, and maybe we deserve that, but I want you to know we opened the box. We saw her ring. We saw the photo." And she choked, then kept going. "I didn't know how much we hurt you until today. We thought we had time. We thought missing the funeral wouldn't matter if we made it up later. But there was no later." She paused. "We failed you." And her, "I can't undo that, but I'll never forget again. Double quotes click. No apology. Just the weight of realization, finally sinking in. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall in the dark. The silence in the room felt different this time. Not hollow, just honest, because now they knew what that date meant. Not just to me, but to the woman they didn't care to know, and to the child they were supposed to love. Every year, July 23rd would come. And every year, no matter how many balloons they blew up or how many candles they lit, that box would haunt them. It wasn't revenge. It was memory. And some memories were designed to echo forever. The call came late afternoon, but I didn't answer it. I was sitting on the back porch, sipping coffee gone cold, watching my daughter chase butterflies in the yard. The sun was strong, and for a fleeting second, I let myself smile at how she twirled and giggled, her dress catching the breeze. Her joy was still pure, untouched by the fractures the adults around her had created. My phone buzzed again. Same caller. I ignored it. Then a text lit up the screen from my cousin Maya. "Did you send something to your parents? Because something just happened." I stared at the message for a few seconds before calling her back. She answered on the first ring, her voice hushed, cautious, like she was calling from the middle of a crime scene. They opened it in front of everyone, she whispered. Opened what? That box you sent, the wooden one. They didn't know who it was from. Thought it might be a gift. So they waited until most of the guests had arrived, and then your mom handed it to Tyler like it was some sentimental surprise. I said nothing. Just let her speak. My fingers gripped the armrest of my chair tighter with every word. They opened it right there at the table. Cake was still in the kitchen. Your dad had just made a toast. Then Tyler opened the lid and pulled out the ring. Everyone went quiet. At first, they didn't realize what it was, but then your mom saw the obituary. I imagined it in vivid detail. The chatter fading, forks freezing mid-air, the laughter choked out by a wave of realization. My wife's name. In print, her face in that photo, her ring glinting under the lights. She turned pale, Maya continued. Like all the blood left her face, she reached for the picture like she was in a dream. And then your dad, he lost it, stormed out of the room, didn't say a word, and Tyler. I asked. He just sat there, holding the photo, looking. Like someone punched him in the chest. Good, I thought. Let the truth sit in their throats like stones they can't swallow, everyone else. I asked. Some of them didn't know what it was, she said, but they knew enough to understand that something had gone horribly wrong. It ruined the whole party. No one touched the cake, half the people left, and your mom. She just sat in the corner crying. The silence on the line stretched. Maya finally spoke again. It was brutal, but maybe they needed brutal. I know they did, I said quietly. That evening, after my daughter fell asleep, I saw the missed calls and voicemails on my phone. 3 from my mom, 1 from Tyler, a dozen texts. I didn't open any of them, not yet, but one voicemail kept calling me back. I played it. My mother's voice trembled through the speaker. Not the composed, careful tone she always used when she wanted to diffuse things. This was different. Raw, frayed. We didn't know how much it hurt you, she began. Her voice cracked on the word hurt. We thought we could make it up later. You have no idea how much we regret not being there that day. We were wrong. God, we were so wrong. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. Then I held that ring in my hand today. And for the first time, I realized what it meant, what we missed, what you went through alone. A sob escaped her throat. She tried to say more, but the words got lost in the crying. I ended the voicemail halfway through, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't bear to hear it all. You don't get to choose comfort over grief and expect forgiveness in a voicemail. Not when you had the chance to stand beside me and chose a party instead. Later that week, Tyler showed up at my door. I opened it and stared at him. He looked older somehow, or maybe just more aware. His eyes held a kind of heaviness I wasn't used to seeing in him. I didn't know they'd skip the funeral, he said, voice low. I thought they'd change their minds. I told them they should go, but when they didn't, I just let it happen. You had a choice too, I said. He nodded. Yeah, I did, and I didn't make the right one. I didn't say anything. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room for a long time without speaking. The house felt smaller with him in it. Like his presence pressed on old wounds I hadn't finished cleaning. I saw her face in that photo, he finally said. And I remembered how she used to bring me soup when I was sick. Do you remember that? She always made extra. I did. Remember, but I didn't reply. I keep hearing Mom cry in my head, he said, eyes glassy. And I don't know how to fix it. You don't, I said. That's the point. He looked down. I never wanted to hurt you, he added. But you did, I said. All of you did. He nodded again. There was nothing left to say. Before he left, he paused at the door. I'll never celebrate my birthday the same again, he said quietly. Good, I thought. Let that day carry weight. Let it carry memory. Because from now on, July 23rd didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to her. To the silence in that chapel. To the photo in that box. To the daughter who still asked why her grandparents disappeared when they were needed most, and to the man they left standing alone at a graveside with a folded speech and a shattered heart. The box was never about revenge. It was about forcing them to see what they couldn't look at before. And now that they had seen it, they could never unsee it. The first July 23rd after the box was quiet. No party. No decorations. No Facebook post celebrating Tyler's life. Just a single photo of a candle on my mother's page, with the caption, remembering someone we lost too soon. There were no tags. No names, but I knew who it was for the shift had begun. That year, they didn't call. Maybe they thought I'd hang up. Maybe they couldn't find the words. Or maybe they were still trying to understand what that date had become no longer. A day of cake and candles, but a day that split our family clean down the middle. The second year, they came, unannounced. I saw them from the window, my mother, my father, and Tyler standing awkwardly at the gate to the cemetery, dressed in black. They held a bouquet of pale pink lilies, my wife's favorite. I watched from a distance as they walked to her headstone. My daughter had drawn a picture that morning, the same way she had when her mother was in the hospital. She placed it there every year taped to a stick, fluttering like a little flag of memory in the wind. They stood there for 10 minutes. My mother knelt down and touched the grave. My father didn't move. Tyler just looked at the ground, and then they left. No words exchanged. No apology offered, but it was something, a gesture in place of guilt. I didn't tell my daughter they came. She didn't ask. But later that evening, when I looked at the headstone, the flowers were still fresh. The third year, they called. Not to me, my daughter. She was 10 by then, old enough to understand the weight of absence, old enough to know who had vanished when her world collapsed. My mother's voice trembled through the phone, asking if they could speak to her. My daughter looked at me with wide eyes, unsure. I told her it was her choice. She nodded and took the phone. I stood nearby as she listened in silence. Then she said, "I missed you, but I missed Mommy more," and handed me the phone. She didn't want to talk any further, and I didn't blame her. When I took the phone, my mother was crying again. "We want to see you," she said. "We want to make it right, but some things can't be made right. Not because forgiveness is impossible, but because some wounds are meant to be remembered. Not for punishment, but for truth. You had one chance to show up when it mattered," I said. "You chose not to." "I know," she whispered. "And we'll carry that for the rest of our lives." That at least I believed. Because every year without fail, the calls continued. The visits to the grave became routine. Sometimes they'd bring flowers, sometimes just a card. They never stayed long. They never expected to be seen. It wasn't for show. It was for her. The woman they never truly knew, and the mistake they could never undo. Tyler stopped celebrating his birthday. He still lived his life, still posted vacation photos and work promotions. But July 23rd was always left blank. No parties, no hashtags, just a silent retreat into reflection. He texted me once on that date. "I wish I had stood up that day. I think about it every year." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to say. My grief had moved on, not healed, not forgotten, but transformed. It became part of the air I breathed. It softened some things and hardened others. It made me a quieter man, more thoughtful, more cautious with who I called family. My daughter grew into the kind of girl her mother would have been proud of, bright, kind, thoughtful beyond her years. Every year on July 23rd, she wore something pink and we did something small to remember her mother. A picnic by the lake, a paper lantern released into the sky, a photo album revisited with soft smiles and damp eyes. That was our new tradition. And I never let anyone else interfere with it. I never told her about the box. I didn't need to. She could feel what that date meant by the way I moved through the day, the way I set the table for 2 instead of 3, the way I lingered at her bedtime just a little longer. That date lived in our bones, not as a scar, but as a reminder. And for my parents, well, they cried now, every year. Sometimes they left voicemails. Sometimes they sent cards. Sometimes they simply posted a black square online with no caption, no explanation. But I knew, everyone knew, because silence, once broken by truth, becomes impossible to ignore. Their tears didn't erase what happened. They didn't undo the empty chairs at the funeral or the hollow comfort of a missed goodbye, but they mattered. They proved they were finally listening, that they had learned what it meant to be left out of someone's last chapter. They had chosen balloons over a burial. And now, every year on that same day, they remembered, and they wept, not just for her, but for themselves, for what they lost, for what they gave up when they decided that a birthday was more important than being there for their son when his world collapsed. They would never forget that choice, not because I punished them, but because I reminded them. With a ring, with a photo, with a box that said everything I no longer needed to say out loud. So when people ask me if I ever forgave them, I say this: I didn't need to, because sometimes the deepest kind of forgiveness is knowing they now live with the truth. And every year, on that same date, the truth brings tears.